A death curse has befallen everyone who's been raised from the dead. Its victims are rotting away, and all efforts to reverse the decay have failed. The souls of the dead are being stolen one by one and trapped inside a necromantic artifact. Only its destruction will free the trapped spirits and allow the dead to be raised once more. All paths lead to Chult, a mysterious land of volcanoes, jungles, and the ruins of fallen kingdoms. Below them all waits a deadly tomb. The trap is set. Will you take the bait? Hello YouTube, Dave here again. Today I'm going to be doing my review of Tomb of Annihilation. This is the latest adventure from Wizards of the Coast for 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons and is designed to support characters levels 1 through 11. Unlike previous adventures that have taken place all within the Sword Coast and northern regions of Faerun, Tomb of Annihilation actually takes place in the southern part of Faerun in the mysterious land of Chult, a land that is largely unexplored, as is evidenced by this map. The player characters are sent there to investigate something that's referred to as the Death Curse. So in this video I'm going to do sort of my overview of the story of the Tomb of Annihilation, as well as my own personal thoughts. Now this video is going to contain spoilers on some of the events that take place in the adventure. I'm not going to discuss too much detail on the main tomb itself, simply because I want to keep that as spoiler-free as possible, with the exception of like the final encounter. So as far as like puzzles or traps or things that can be expected to be encountered in there, I'm not going to discuss those, because I think at this point everybody pretty well suspects that the Soulmonger is going to be part of the final encounter in the adventure. So without further ado, we'll look at the adventure itself and I'll give my thoughts. The adventure opens with the player characters in a meeting with a retired adventurer by the name of Sindra Sylvain. She is herself affected by the Death Curse, having been resurrected from the dead in the past. She discusses with the player characters what's happening with the curse, and that it is slowly draining the life from anybody who's ever been resurrected in the past. In addition, it's revealed that resurrection magic simply doesn't function at this point in time. Any attempts to raise people, even if they've never been resurrected before, simply fails. She has learned through contacts in the organization known as the Harpers that an necromantic artifact by the name of the Soulmonger is responsible, and that the Soulmonger is located somewhere in the mysterious land of Chult. She asks the player characters to accompany her there so that they can discover the location of the Soulmonger and destroy it, freeing Faerun of this death curse. Mechanically speaking, the death curse is something that affects anyone who's been raised or resurrected, and what it does is every night at midnight it drains 1 hit point from their maximum, meaning that if you have a player character who's been resurrected from the dead, then at the end of each day they lose a hit point from their maximum, which they cannot regain. Eventually this will cause their hit points to be reduced to 0, and when that happens they are once again dead and their soul trapped within the relic known as the Soulmonger. Another interesting aspect of the Soulmonger is it affects undead such as liches. Now a lich is an undead wizard who, when their body is destroyed, their soul is transferred to a magical artifact or relic known as a phylactery. In this case, since the Soulmonger is such a powerful artifact, it steals the soul from a lich before it manages to find its way to its phylactery, meaning that even some greater undead may be interested in having this artifact destroyed so that they no longer have to fear mortality once again. When the player characters agree to take this quest, they are teleported to a location known as Port Nyanzaru. Once they're there, they have the ability to explore the city, interact with some of the local NPCs, and in addition they can also take on some side quests, something that can provide them with precious information as well as necessary levels of experience if you're doing this with lower level characters. Things that the player characters can do while in Port Nyanzaru involves things such as watching The events take place at Executioner's Run, which is a large trench that's dug out, and anyone who's convicted of serious crimes can earn their freedom by running from one end of the trench to the other. Sounds simple enough, but this trench is usually filled with carnivorous and hungry creatures that are looking to feast upon anything that enters the pit. Anyone that manages to make it to the end is heralded as a hero, and some individuals will actually commit crimes to once again brave the pit, because betting on the pit is a great source of income. Also, they can even partake in dinosaur races, in which they themselves or they can bet on racers who race dinosaurs throughout the city. Which is something that I actually think is kind of a neat little distraction. So there are definitely some interesting things that they can do in addition to the side quests. The main recommendation of Sindra Sylvain is to hire on a guide, an individual who's familiar with the wilderness and jungles of Chult to guide them, so that they can explore and again try to uncover where this artifact is. That brings us to Chapter 2, the Land of Chult, where the player characters can essentially explore and come across several different locations and potential encounter scenarios. These involve, for example, if they go through the Bay of Chult, then a giant dragon turtle who will surface and demand tribute to allow the ship safe passage in the form of treasure that is thrown overboard and gifted to the dragon turtle, which is, again, sort of an interesting idea. They can also come across an abandoned camp that was set up by the Order of the Gauntlet, having been overrun by a group of undead, or even potentially find their way to the actual new camp that's been set up. During this time, they have the ability to discover that other organizations are also operating in Chult, such as Agents of the Flaming Fist, a mercenary company well known in the city of Baldur's Gate. In addition to that, there are also Red Wizards of Thay, led by the Lich Valindra Shadowmantle, who is currently taking on the guise of a living elven woman. They can either deal with them through combat, or even potentially team up, since they're all working towards the same goal of finding the location of the Soulmonger itself. Once they figure out the information that they need, the adventure steers them towards the Forbidden City of Amu, which is where the bulk of the campaign will actually take place. The city itself is the site of the infamous Tomb of Annihilation, though it goes under a different name here. And the player characters will have to essentially fully explore this Forbidden City in order to get the items that they need to enter this tomb. In order to do that, they have to explore 9 different shrines dedicated to the 9 trickster gods of Amu. Each one of these shrines holds a hidden puzzle piece, which is required to gain entry into the Tomb of the 9 Gods, which is where the Soulmonger is housed. Once the characters go through and explore these 9 shrines, they may realize that they're not alone. If they haven't struck an uneasy alliance with the Red Wizards of Thay are also exploring these shrines and will have gained some of these puzzle pieces, meaning that the player characters have the potential to stumble across shrines where the monsters have already been defeated, the traps deactivated, and the puzzle piece missing. Once they go through and explore 8 of the shrines, the 9th one, the final puzzle piece, has actually been taken and captured by a Yuan-ti by the name of Ras Nissi. Whether the player characters go there by being captured or taken prisoner, or they find it on their own, the next step after exploring each of the shrines is to visit a location known as the Fane of the Night Serpent. It is there that Ras Nissi and his Yuan-ti servants dwell, and it's there where the final of the puzzle pieces is being held. The player characters can negotiate with Ras Nissi, since he wants to see the Soulmonger also destroyed. And if they agree to work peacefully, then he will simply allow them the opportunity to take the final puzzle piece and explore the Tomb of the 9 Gods. Otherwise, the player characters will have to sneak in and potentially deal with several encounters that will cause them to need to steal the final puzzle piece. So that is an option as well. Once they've gotten all of the puzzle pieces, all 9 of them, then they're able to go to the main part of the adventure, the titular, well, it's not the titular because they don't actually refer to it as this, but it's referred to as the Tomb of the Nine Gods instead of the Tomb of Annihilation. But this is where the main dungeon in the adventure takes place. Now this dungeon is done over the course of 6 different levels, each of the levels having their own unique theme. So again, I'm not going to go over all of them, but the first one is referred to as the Rotten Halls, and you kind of go from there. The Dungeon of Deception is the second level. And again, I don't want to spoil any of the potential puzzles or traps that are contained within here. So, once the characters explore their way through the Tomb of the Nine Gods themselves, they do have the ability to come across the remains or the remnants of the actual 9 trickster gods themselves. So these are gods who were killed by Acerec, and their essence is trapped within the dungeon. If the player characters manage to free these essences, there's a chance that they may attempt to take over or inhabit one of the player characters. If this happens, and they're able to possess the player characters, then the characters themselves gain new flaws, as well as new powers, which range from increasing ability scores to being able to turn yourselves invisible, move up and down, vertical surfaces, and there's a lot of interesting abilities that they can do. The gods themselves will actually struggle to control player characters, meaning that there are times if multiple souls are freed, that they may actually force their way in and force another one of the trickster gods out. Ultimately, the player characters discover the relic known as the Soulmonger. The Soulmonger, which I will show a depiction of here, once I find it. Oh. Alright, so there we have the Soulmonger. The Soulmonger is an item designed to trap souls and trap soul energy for the purpose of feeding an undead abomination known as an atropal. What an atropal is it was a creation of the gods that was abandoned, and it's considered to be something of like a stillborn type of godling creature. It's in a state of undeath, so it's never actually lived in the first place. Acerec's goal is to feed it with enough soul energy to create or to transform this atropal into an actual god. The player characters, when they destroy the Soulmonger, disrupt that plan. However, they don't incur the wrath of Acerec directly unless they destroy the atropal itself. Once they do that, Acerec arrives to confront them. Now, at this point, if the player characters are possessed by any of the souls of the 9 trickster gods, who bear a pretty heavy grudge towards Acerec, then the souls empower them even further, granting them additional abilities such as extra temporary hit points at the start of each round and the ability to deal extra damage to Acerec directly. The adventure ends with the player characters either simply destroying the Soulmonger and leaving the atropal, or their confrontation with Acerec. Acerec is a very challenging encounter, however, with the soul elements inhabiting the player characters, it does level the battlefield somewhat. Acerec fights until reduced to around 100 hit points, at which point he does flee. If defeated fully, his soul retreats back to its phylactery, which again would happen because the Soulmonger itself was destroyed, where he simply allows the player characters to die of other means or old age. If he retreats, then there's a chance that he may be encountered again as he gathers information about the player characters and plots his vengeance. And that's essentially the story of Tomb of Annihilation, which is kind of a simple one at its heart. The player characters arrive in Chult with the purpose of trying to find the location of the Soulmonger, and the rest of the campaign is just basically built around gaining access to the Soulmonger and destroying it. That said, there's a lot of potential in this adventure, and it's something that I really do like. My main issues with the adventure itself is the level range. I've always had a problem with it from the moment that they announced it, and it still doesn't quite seem fitting for characters of levels 1 through 11. Or at least definitely not to start at level 1. And the reason that I really feel that more and more, having witnessed or read through the book, is I go to the actual suggested character levels. for where they should be when they achieve when they reach certain points in the adventure. Now, Dwellers in the Forbidden City, Fane of the Night Serpent, and Tomb of the Nine Gods, that's the main bulk of the adventure, with player characters entering the Forbidden City to gain access to the Tomb of the Nine Gods, having to explore the Fane of the Night Serpent along the way. And those three things, the bulk of this adventure, is meant to be for characters of at least 5th level. And it recommends that if they enter the Lost City of Amu before they reach 5th level, to either simply grant them 5th level, or to throw random encounters at them to the point that they can level up, type of thing. So levels 1 through 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th level is going to be spent basically with padding, meaning that the characters would be expected to be taking on the side quests that are presented to them in Port Nyanzaru, or side quests that they go through when they're exploring the lands of Chult, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But the issue with this is that the Tomb of Annihilation is kind of set to a ticking clock. So my recommendation would be to have characters of a higher level enter Chult than first. For example, I have a group of characters that should be around 3rd level by the time I want to start this adventure, meaning that it's reasonable for them to gain a level or two before they reach the Lost City of Amu, or the Forbidden City of Amu. So that is sort of my single biggest recommendation. The only other issue that I kind of have with the adventure itself is that Asurek doesn't really feel as directly involved as he should. His idea of creating turning something else into a god is interesting, but I don't know if that's necessarily the best motivation that I would have for him. For example, the Tomb of Horrors 4th edition adventure is built around the idea of Asurek wanting to become a god himself. So even though that failed in that adventure, or potentially failed in that adventure, it feels like it's sort of a step backwards for him to want to create a god out of something else. The information contained in here about Chult is itself actually pretty cool and pretty interesting, and definitely sets up the ability to run several adventures in here. Now, another thing is that if you want to start with 1st level characters in the land of Chult, my recommendation would be to have them start off before the death curse is known about. So allow them to simply explore the environment, explore the land of Chult somewhat first, gain them a few levels, and then have the death curse become something that becomes a bit more prevalent. You could even build a campaign around the player character simply trying to map the land of Chult itself. When they first arrive, Sindra Sylvain gives them a map. Gives them a map of Chult that displays all the known or explored locations, which is mostly around the coast itself. So as you can see, there is plenty of unexplored space, and you could really design lower level adventures and a lower level campaign around simply trying to fill in these spaces. And that's something that I think is actually really cool, and it's probably how I would go about having 1st level characters. Let them explore a bit, fill in some of this map before finally starting the adventure that's presented in here. The adventure itself is well written. There's a lot of enjoyable stuff in here. There's a lot of cool locations and a lot of interesting places the player characters can examine. But I just feel that it would have been better to let them do some of that before you get into the ticking clock of the actual death curse. It even presents you with an opportunity to have one of the player characters be raised from the dead, only to have this curse start to affect them. Now, one of the interesting aspects of this death curse, for example, is the way that it impacts D&D Adventurers League, if you're going to be running Adventurers League using this adventure. Because characters of levels 1, 2, 3, or 4, if they die, they can be brought back by their faction. Now, this could be a bit of an issue, because if the player characters are brought back, then this adventure begins, then they're going to be losing a hit point every single day. And if you're starting with a 2nd level character, for example, who was brought back by their faction, they're probably going to die before you even get to start the campaign itself. Looking at the Adventurers League information, it looks like the death curse has been in effect for about 20 days before the player characters actually begin, meaning that lower level characters such as wizards, even clerics, rogues, really anything other than perhaps barbarians, are probably going to end up being dead before the adventure starts. Now, the players have the ability to use surrogate characters of 3rd or 8th level, depending on what tier of adventuring that they're in, and they can play those throughout the course of the adventure until the Soulmonger is destroyed, at which point they can have their other characters resurrected. But it's something that, if you're running this with Adventurers League, you have to be careful because, again, your lower level characters, if they've died before, will probably start the adventure dead again, which is something that's sort of anticlimactic for the player characters. Another interesting aspect of this particular adventure is the meat grinder option. So the meat grinder option makes survivability much more difficult, meaning that normally if a character is knocked unconscious, they make a death saving throw and roll a d20. On a result of 10 or higher, it's considered to be a success. Using the meat grinder rules, the characters actually only succeed if they roll a 15 or greater, making it much more likely that they're going to lose characters throughout this adventure. But the issue is that if they're losing characters, then it makes it difficult, especially from an organized play standpoint, because if you don't have your character raised, then, or you don't use a surrogate, then you have to start all over with a brand new character at first level. So there's a few things along those lines that I take a little bit of issue with, but my main thing is I would have liked Acerec to be more directly involved. I would have liked the level range to skew a little bit higher, even if it goes to like 13th or 14th, because I mean, certainly having the extra abilities from the Trickster Gods can make the characters a bit more evenly matched to Acerec, but I still think that he should be more directly involved since this is one of his major schemes, and I think that, you know, he should be present to essentially protect the Soulmonger. And it would be something that would be kind of interesting to have him be encountered prior to the room where the Soulmonger is kept, just so that he can protect it. And if the characters defeat him, then they're able to destroy the Soulmonger. And I still feel like feeding it to the souls to the Atropal, while it's an interesting idea, it just feels, again, like a step backwards, considering that in a previously released Tomb of Horrors adventure, Acerec was trying to steal divine energy to turn himself into a god. So I just feel like the Soulmonger would be better off feeding him than necessarily the Atropal, but that's something that you would have to decide on your own. Overall, this is a fantastic adventure. There's a lot of really interesting and unique things about it, and the fact that it provides as much information as it does on the land of Chult itself makes it a great resource for future campaigns, similar to how Out of the Abyss had enough information for you to run adventures in the Underdark. This one will allow you to create campaigns that are meant to be played in the land of Chult and take you away from the main Sword Coast region that's been explored to death in the previous adventures. I do recommend this overall. I don't know if I would consider this to be my favorite of the pre-released adventures or pre-written adventures so far, but I would rank it up there. I mean, there's a lot of really great ideas in here. You know, it's awesome to be able to interact with the factions in the way that they do here, with their motivations for the Soulmonger. You know, you have the Red Wizards of Thay, you have the Flaming Fist mercenaries who are trying to create a presence for themselves in Chult as well. And there's even a completely separate side story that doesn't necessarily have to play into the main plot at all, involving a human hero by the name of Artist Climber. And he possesses a relic known as the Ring of Winter, and that keeps him, essentially, it grants him immortality. And there are individuals who are looking to steal that ring from him in order to hopefully subvert the death curse, as well as a group of frost giants that are actually exploring the realm of Chult to try to find him and take back this relic, because it was an item that is sacred to the giants themselves. So that's the adventure, and again, my recommendations would be to simply either let the characters explore Chult for a while before implementing the death curse, or have them start at higher levels before they make their way there. It's also a bit of a letdown for me personally to have the opening of the adventure just be the characters speaking with this Sindra Sylvain and learning all the information that they really need to up front. Learn about the death curse through her, learn about the Soulmonger through her, and learn that it's taking place in Chult. I think it would have been more interesting to allow the characters to discover the death curse, or when they discover that the death curse is existing, to seek out ways of learning where it's coming from and let the player characters be the ones to discover that, you know, this relic known as the Soulmonger is responsible and that it's hidden somewhere in the land of Chult. At which point they may seek out individuals that can help them get there, which is where they may meet Syndra Sylvain, who's heard of them through their, you know, discoveries and their work to try to uncover what's causing this death curse, and then have her be, you know, the one who approaches them with the offer to take them to Chult. So that's what I would probably end up doing myself, as well as making Asurek a bit more directly involved in this adventure, and probably wanting to push the level range up a few levels to give the player characters a bit more ability to actually confront Asurek fully. And also, if they manage to defeat Asurek, considering that they'd be doing it with the aid of these elements of the trickster gods, granting them powers that they wouldn't normally have, I would definitely have Asurek plan his revenge later on, and confront the player characters when they no longer have the souls of these Amu trickster gods inhabiting them, making him again a much more challenging encounter. So there you go. That's sort of my review. That's the basic storyline that happens, and my thoughts. So if you're looking for a new adventure, if you're looking for something that's going to be a lot of fun to run, I do recommend Tomb of Annihilation. One last thought, however, is this is not an adventure that is friendly towards new DMs. It's really not laid out in a way that inexperienced DMs will just be able to follow from point A to point B, especially given the land of Chult itself. So Chapter 2 in particular just has all these locations laid out, but they don't actually give you the level range that the player character should be when they encounter them, meaning that the DM may end up inadvertently running deadly encounters, or the inexperienced players who may be used to the idea of entering locations that they should be able to overcome, just be utterly obliterated by the fact that they enter an area that's just simply too high a level for them. So I think that, you know, it would have been nice to have had sort of maybe just an outline of encounters or locations that the player character should come across for inexperienced DMs. So, you know, they enter here at this level, and if you're, you know, relatively inexperienced, then, you know, you may want to stick to this, or this in terms of the locations for exploring Chult, and instead of, you know, and try to stay away from some of these ones, or just something to kind of help out inexperienced dungeon masters, because it just simply flat out says that they don't lay them out in a logical way, because, you know, if it's deadly, then the player characters should know to run. So I just think that there are ways that they could have made this a little bit more inclusive to newer dungeon masters. As this stands, I consider this to be more of an intermediate to veteran levels of dungeon mastering in order to get the most out of this adventure. But anyway, that's sort of like my thoughts on it. You know, let me know in the comments below if you guys have started playing through this, what your experiences are, what your thoughts are if you're a dungeon master, how you feel about the level range, how you feel about the way that the adventure is presented, and if you have any suggestions on ways to alter it to make things maybe a little bit more straightforward for beginners, then, you know, please let me know that in the comments below as well, because I'd really be interested in hearing those thoughts. So anyway, thank you guys very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you next time.